All right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. I'm here with my esteemed Sahaba, Brother Jamal, and we wanted to just discuss some things about the experience of prison from the Muslim perspective. So I was going to ask you a few things, brother, inshallah. First off, you can introduce yourself if you like, you know what I mean, to the world, inshallah.
Jamal ibn Nasser el-Karaki.
Alhamdulillah. And you're from?
I am from Palestine originally, by way of Chicago and LA.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. It's interesting because we share a history that we didn't know. Like I lived a few blocks away from you in Inglewood in the year 81 to 82 before I went to Texas. And we know a lot of the same people who went to the schools in the area. So that was interesting to find out when we met a lot of years later. There's a lot of ground to cover, but because we wanted to speak about the prison experience, what do you recollect in regards to your experience in prison from the Muslim perspective?
Well, what do I recollect? I'm gonna start in 1986. What I recollect in prison at that time was a small group of Muslims. There wasn't many. There was a large presence of the Nation of Islam. That's how Islam essentially spread throughout the Department of Corrections in California. It was primarily because of what the brothers from the nation put down before we would arrive in the 80s.
Alhamdulillah. That's interesting because I had a discussion with my brother Abdul Rahman, my Sahaba, and I have expressed to him that I'm of the opinion that there weren't a lot of Muslims in prison between the years, and I mean Orthodox Muslims in prison between the years, let's just say 70 to 80.
Correct.
And if they were, they might have been, a businessman here or there that committed a crime, or things of that. Muslims weren't just coming to prison. Most of the people who were Muslims who were in prison had criminal backgrounds who had converted to Islam, like you said, the brothers from the nation, right? And then when the nation split with Elijah Muhammad, I of the opinion that some of their children grew up to maybe perhaps commit a crime, find themselves in prison, and they would have been the small population of Muslims in the California correctional institutions before the independent masjids took root in the city and started developing other Muslims.
That is correct. That is correct. Most of them were followers of Wafd Muhammad, Orthodox Islam, the ones that broke away from the nation, including the ones that were from the nation. They were either relatives, older relatives, or they were of the same age, but some of the brothers from the Nation of Islam joined Wafd Muhammad's Orthodox Islam at the time. And at that time, in prison, there wasn't a lot of literature available on Islam. So there wasn't much literature in publication on Islam, period. A lot of the Islamic material for those who wanted to learn about Orthodox Islam, a lot of these books came from India, they came from Pakistan, they came from Iran, Tanzania, and those were probably the first books on Orthodox Islam that were published in English.
I remember the recycled paper books.
The recycled paper books. A lot of brothers was getting books from South Africa, from Ahmadiyya, from their organization. So those were little paperback books. A lot of brothers that was transitioning from Christianity to Islam. A lot of them were educated through the Ahmadiyya type materials. Yeah, so there wasn't a lot of material available. Not to mention that from 74, 75, late 70s, up until 1980, there wasn't a lot of people even educated on Orthodox Islam. The ones who became Orthodox Muslims, the ones that called themselves imams or Muslim chaplains, or the ones that called themselves um, educators amongst the Wafdi Muhammad community. Outside of that, you had a very, very small branch of Shia Muslims, very small. A lot of them were educated by way of the material that was available through Tehran, coming directly from Iran. And it was extremely limited. The material was extremely limited.
I want to take advantage of a segue because you mentioned Iran, and this is another thing that I've discussed with my Sahaba about the African Americans who gravitated towards Shia Islam, like in prison, right? From my recollection and experience, the appeal of the Shia Islam was rooted in the black nationalist struggle coming out of the late 60s and into the 70s with the Black Power and their expression, right? And many of the ex-revolutionaries who embraced Islam tended to lean towards that because that was what was prevalent in the world due to the conflicts that were going on with Iran and the United States, and coming up to the taking of the American hostages and so on and so forth, right? That time span, I believe that the focus on Shia Islam from the African American community was rooted in their historical plights as revolutionaries.
That's correct. It's correct. You're talking about 1979 forward. So that is correct. I can give you an example. There was a good brother of mine named Abdul Jabbar. Abdul Jabbar was a Shia Muslim. He comes from the Nation of Islam in the 60s. He grew up in the nation. But when he converted over to Orthodoxy, he got a little bit of material out of Tanzania, Africa, that was referring to Shia Islam. And it was minimal. It's like what they would teach their elementary school students about Islam.
Right.
It was on a very minor level of education. But I recall him in the 80s. I went to his cell and he had a large portrait of the Ayatollah Khomeini on the wall. And I asked him, what did he know about Ayatollah Khomeini? And this is how we struck up our conversation and became a little bit more educated after that conversation, because the education for most of those brothers that was coming through the revolutionary identity of linking up with the Islamic Revolution of Iran were more tended more to lean towards the revolutionary aspect of Islam, because that's what they've known and that's what they've seen. There wasn't a lot of that in the quote-unquote Sunni world of Islam, or the Orthodoxy. Islamic countries or Islamic cities that people may have known as Orthodox countries of Islam, quote-unquote Sunni.
Right.
So the revolutionary aspect was one of the greatest magnets for some of those brothers that you're referring to that became Shia Muslims, specifically the ones incarcerated. I'm talking about that's correct.
Right. Okay, so yeah, what about we both from LA, Inglewood. We know that LA is predominantly permeated with gang culture. So there's no way, if you attended the public schools or even other schools, Catholic schools, some of them, right? you probably grew up with some gang members.
Correct.
If you played sports at the local park, you probably grew up with gang members.
Correct.
I was reflecting on how geographically LA is broken down into these sections and these parks and recreational centers, and usually parks or recreational centers are hubs for youth, and it's usually a gang centered around the park.
Correct.
You see what I'm saying? Or another thing is when we were playing Pop Warner, most of the individuals who played Pop Warner football in the late 70s, early 80s kind of went on to become gang members. You know, same guys who were pop locking and playing football and stuff later, you know, somehow emerged in or found their way to some particular gang, clique, or sect, right?
Correct.
So, moving that forward to prison, did you run across any of the old gang members in prison that you grew up with?
Yes. Well, me personally, of course, I not only ran across a lot of the reputable gang members from Los Angeles coming up in the 70s and 80s. Not only did I run into them throughout the county jails, and then eventually through the reception centers, eventually through the maximum security prisons. Yes, a lot of them. Most of them I've ran across. And I've ran across a lot of them that have accepted Islam in the early stages of accepting Islam in prison. What would be considered the early stages of Islam spreading throughout the Department of Corrections in California would be the late 70s to the late 80s. So I would probably pick that decade of maybe, let's say, 78 to 88. Okay. That period right there. After that is a different story. It's another chapter. It's when Islam spread more on a massive scale. There was more material available. There were more books passed around that were available. There were more people that you can meet in prison that were foreigners in America committing crimes that happened to be Muslims. So by them going into the system, a lot of their knowledge of Islam was also shared and spread throughout the prison system. And by that time, the spread of Islam amongst gang members was extremely common. It wasn't uncommon. It was more common than you had gang members going to church.
And we're talking about 79 to 89.
79, 89. Okay. That era, for sure. Okay. For sure, that era.
So that would be right in line with pretty much the growth of the prison gangs behind the wall also, because the Crips being, and the Bloods being relatively new in the 70s, right, didn't have great formidable presences behind the wall until, I would say, the late 70s and 80s going into the 80s.
Going into the 80s,
yeah. I mean, because in the 70s it was still a lot of old school. Not that they weren't there.
And were limited. And were limited.
Yeah, but the numbers had not exploded the way they did in the 80s.
In the 80s, yeah. That is correct.
So kind of the Muslims grew up on the yard at the same time as the gangs were growing up on the yard.
It would be fair to say, yes.
Okay.
As you see the spread of gang members showing up to prison in masses, for instance, you would only go to a few prisons. You would go to Tracy, or you would go to San Quentin, or you would go to Old Folsom. I mean, you would go to Soledad. So even the prisons themselves were limited. Not only was the population limited, but the places
to go
were limited.
Correct. I want to pause right for a minute.